Let's talk about server-side rendering in TanStack Start. Server-side rendering is one of the core concepts in any framework, but especially in TanStack Start, because it's not all black or white. It's not just server-side rendering or client-side rendering. Actually, it offers 4 types of modes that you can choose from. So in this video, I want to cover what are the server-side rendering modes that TanStack Start has to offer, how you can configure it in your application. There are actually 2 ways you can do that, and also how to combine them or compose them inside your application and which effects they have on your code. And lastly, I'm going to give you a really cool trick if you want to organize your code better in the application and have specific rendering strategies for each section of your app. But first, quick word from today's sponsor, TestSprite. If you are still wasting hours writing end-to-end tests manually in your application, then I think it's time for you to check out TestSprite. TestSprite is the easiest way to create and also maintain end-to-end tests in your application. Not only does it create the end-to-end tests for you, it also gives you a really intuitive interface for viewing and editing your tests. You can adjust each test step on the fly by simply replaying the recording and adding or editing the interactions like navigation, field inputs, click, scroll, or asserts. If you want an easy, transparent, and up-to-date test coverage inside your application, then check it out at testsprite.com. Now let's dive into the video. So in order to configure server-side rendering in TanStack Start, you have 2 possibilities. The first one is to configure it globally, and this is going to be the default server-side rendering strategy. And for that, you can just edit the source/start.ts file, and this is where your TanStack Start application instance is configured. If you don't have that file inside your project, you can just create a new one and add the content to it, and this setting is going to be set up. And the second way of setting up this configuration entry is to just do it at a page level, and inside each page where you're calling create file route, you can pass in your SSR configuration. So the first option, which is also the default one, is setting SSR to true. And when it's set to true, both your component, the loader, and also before load function get called on the server if it's the first time that you're visiting the website. So when you just load the content initially, it's going to be called on the server, and the client just receives a ready to go HTML document. And when the user navigates to a second page, this is where the client side navigation takes over the whole thing, which means that the loaders and the component are going to be called on the client. And by the way, I'm also working on a video that explains this isomorphic concept in TanStack Start in details, which should be released in a few days, so subscribe if you don't want to miss it. Now, on the other extreme, you can turn off server-side rendering completely, which means you can just set it to false. And if you do this, this is going to give you your typical single page application experience, and everything is rendered on the client. So the loader functions run on the client, as well as your component is also rendered on the client. Now, the third variant is setting SSR to data only. And what this does is that the loader and before load functions are going to have the same behavior as when server-side rendering is set to true, which means they're going to run on the server in the beginning, and in further calls, they're going to be called on the client. And when it comes to the component, this is always going to be rendered on the client. I think a good use case for this is to just reduce the load on the server while still taking advantage of server-side functions to have secure functions in your application. And it doesn't matter to you that much that the application takes a while to load for the user. It's just the initial loading time. So I think that would be a fair use case for this. The last and probably the most interesting configuration option is to pass in a function. I'm not exactly sure what is the use case for this, but you can actually grab the search parameters or the route parameters and decide on the fly what kind of behavior you want to have. And depending on the parameters, you can decide you want to have full server-side rendering by passing SSR equals true, or completely turn it off using SSR equals false, or pass in data only. One crucial thing you have to know before you start setting this up in each route is to understand how inheritance works. So if you configure SSR in a route, this is going to be applied to all of its children. But if you want to override it, then you can only do it in a restrictive manner, which means if you have SSR set to true in a top route, then you're allowed to set it to data only or false in a lower route. And if you have it set up to data only, then you can also just make the switch to data only or false. And if it's set to false, then you cannot turn it back to true or data only. I hope that this somehow makes a little bit of sense. And one trick that I want to give you before you leave, it's very easy to lose track of which part of your application is client side or server-side rendered. And for that, I would really recommend using pathless layouts in order to organize your application. For example, if you are migrating from a single page application to TanStack Start and you have a part of your application that is interactive and you want to have client-side rendering, then you can put it in a pathless layout folder, for example, -app, and you can configure this one with SSR equals false, and the rest of the application is just going to have normal server-side rendering. So you also have the advantages of better SEO or social media previews or other features that just come from having server-side rendering. By the way, if you're learning TanStack, then definitely check out my course on learntanstack.com. If you want to keep up with the TanStack ecosystem, check out tanstackweekly.com, a free newsletter that I personally write and send every week. And if you want to have a type-safe markdown setup in your TanStack Start app, then definitely check out my latest video. Thanks again for watching and see you in the next one. Ciao!